"No one's watching. Now do it," she whispered. The mail-order bride's
This ends
secret
right
shocked
now.
him.
You
Jonathan had
understand me?
never been very good with people. He was the kind of man who preferred the quiet company of books and the occasional walk in the park to parties or crowded events. After losing his wife a few years ago, his life had settled into a routine that was both comforting and painfully lonely. His children had grown up and moved away, leaving him in a house that echoed with memories of laughter and conversation. Every corner seemed to hold a reminder of what he once had, and every evening felt longer than the last. The idea of opening himself up to someone new had seemed impossible for a long time. Yet the loneliness gnawed at him, an invisible companion that no amount of reading or gardening could chase away. It was during one of those quiet, lonely evenings that he found himself scrolling through profiles on a website he had never imagined he would use. At first he told himself it was just curiosity, but then he saw her picture, Yelena. Her smile was soft, not the kind that demanded attention, but one that seemed to invite warmth. Her eyes held a calmness and a spark at the same time, a combination that intrigued him immediately. There was something about the way she looked at the camera, a sense that she was seeing beyond it, seeing him even through the screen. He clicked on her profile, read her words carefully, and something inside him shifted. She wrote about small joys, morning walks, reading by the window, baking bread, the simple things he had always loved but had done alone for so long. Jonathan began messaging her, first with cautious, polite words. He asked about her life, her interests, and her family, and Yelena responded with thoughtfulness and patience. Her answers were not rushed. They were like little stories that gave him glimpses into her world. She spoke about growing up in a small village, about the challenges she had faced, and about her dreams of experiencing life beyond her home country. Jonathan found himself waiting eagerly for her replies, counting the minutes until his phone buzzed with a new message. Over the next few months, their conversations became routine. They talked about everything, their favorite books, music, childhood memories, hopes, and fears. Jonathan began to imagine what it would be like to have her in his home, to share meals and laughter, to have someone listen when he spoke without interruption. He pictured simple mornings, with Yelena making tea in the kitchen while he read the newspaper, her presence bringing warmth to the quiet house. Yet, along with excitement, there was a flicker of doubt. He knew little about her life outside their conversations. She had shared enough to build trust, but not everything. Jonathan sometimes wondered if he was falling in love with an idea more than a person, but the thought of waiting longer seemed unbearable. After months of talking, they decided she would come and live with him. The day of her arrival was marked on his calendar, circled and highlighted in bold, as if the color would make time move faster. The morning she was to arrive, Jonathan woke unusually early. He cleaned the house from top to bottom, arranging fresh flowers in vases, dusting every surface, and making sure the bed was perfectly neat. He walked through the rooms repeatedly, checking and rechecking everything. When he finally finished, he sat down in his favorite armchair, hands trembling slightly, heart racing with anticipation. He kept imagining the moment he would see her walking through the door, her smile greeting him in person for the first time. When the taxi pulled up, Jonathan could hardly breathe. He saw her stepping down carefully, holding her small suitcase, looking around with curious eyes. She was even more beautiful than her photographs. Her hair fell gently over her shoulders, and her clothes, simple yet elegant, gave her an air of quiet grace. She looked around the neighborhood with interest, and when her gaze met Jonathan's, she smiled, that same soft, inviting smile that had drawn him in months ago. "Jonathan?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. He nodded, moving toward her to take her suitcase. "Welcome," he said, feeling a lump in his throat. She gave a small nod as if acknowledging the effort he had made to prepare for her arrival. She stepped into the house, her eyes scanning the rooms with polite curiosity. Every detail mattered to her. The neatness of the furniture, the arrangement of the flowers, the sunlight streaming through the windows. Over the next few hours, Jonathan showed her around the house. He pointed out the little things he had always found comforting: the reading nook by the window, the garden he tended with care, the photographs of his children on the mantel. Yelena listened attentively, asking questions here and there, commenting on details that made him feel seen. Her presence was calming yet intriguing. She had a quiet confidence that made him feel both welcomed and slightly off balance. They shared their first meal together, a simple lunch Jonathan had prepared, nervous to make everything perfect. Yelena ate slowly, savoring each bite, complimenting the flavors in a way that made him blush. Conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time in a long while, Jonathan felt a sense of connection that went beyond polite company. He realized he was no longer alone in his thoughts. There was someone in the house whose presence changed the atmosphere, whose smile seemed to make the walls feel warmer. As evening fell, Jonathan and Yelena sat in the living room, sipping tea and listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood outside. The day had been long, filled with introductions, explanations, and little discoveries about each other. He found himself observing her closely, noticing the way her eyes flicked to the books on the shelf, the gentle curve of her smile when she laughed at something he said, the careful way she set her teacup down. Every detail seemed significant, as if he was cataloging her presence, storing it in memory. Yet, even in the comfort of the evening, a small unease lingered in Jonathan's mind. He had spent so much time imagining Yelena, crafting a picture of the woman he hoped she would be, that he realized he barely knew the real person. What secrets did she carry from her past? What habits, experiences, or thoughts might surprise him? He pushed the questions aside, not wanting to dampen the joy of the moment, but he felt a quiet tension under the surface, a whisper of curiosity and caution he could not ignore. As the night deepened, they retired to their separate rooms. Jonathan lay awake, thinking about the day, replaying every moment, every glance, every word. He realized that meeting her had been far more intense than he had anticipated. The image he had held for so long had come alive, and it was both comforting and thrilling. He could not help but wonder what the coming days would bring, how their relationship would evolve, and what hidden depths Yelena might reveal over time. Sleep finally came, but with it came dreams filled with possibilities. Jonathan imagined mornings filled with laughter, evenings of quiet companionship, and shared memories that would grow over the years. He also dreamt of the mysteries she carried, the unspoken parts of her life that he had yet to discover. In those dreams, he felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension, knowing that the life he had imagined was only beginning, and the true journey, understanding Yelena as she truly was just ahead. By the next morning, Jonathan had made a silent promise to himself, to cherish the connection they had begun to form, to be patient, and to approach this new chapter with an open heart and mind. He understood that the reality of sharing a life with someone was far more complex than letters and photographs, yet he was ready to face it. After all, the longing for companionship, for shared experiences, had been with him for so long, and now it had finally arrived at his doorstep in the form of Yelena, a woman whose presence promised warmth, challenge, and perhaps a deeper understanding of life than he had ever known. Life in Jonathan's house began to settle into a rhythm after Yelena's arrival, but it was a rhythm he had never experienced before. Her presence was subtle yet unmistakable, like a new melody woven into a song he had played for years. She moved through the rooms quietly, carefully, but Jonathan noticed the way her gaze sometimes lingered longer than usual. At first, he thought he was imagining things. The loneliness of the past years had sharpened his awareness. But soon, he realized that Yelena had habits and ways that were unlike anything he had encountered before. She seemed to notice the smallest details in the house. If a chair was slightly out of place, she would adjust it without a word. If a picture frame was tilted, she would straighten it almost imperceptibly. Jonathan found himself both amused and impressed. He had never lived with someone who cared so much about the little things. Yet there was also a quiet intensity in the way she observed her surroundings, as if she were constantly analyzing, learning, or preparing for something he could not quite see. Over breakfast one morning, she mentioned casually that she enjoyed observing people and their habits. "It tells a lot about them," she said, her eyes fixed on Jonathan as he poured coffee. He smiled politely, not sure what she meant, but a small shiver of curiosity ran down his spine. He had thought he knew her from their letters, but her words hinted at a depth he had not yet understood. There was more to her than the simple, gentle persona he had imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Jonathan began to notice small, unusual behaviors. Yelena would sometimes disappear into a room and stay longer than necessary, emerging with a calm, composed smile as if nothing had happened. Occasionally, she would make cryptic comments about her life back home, stories that seemed ordinary at first but carried subtle undertones of strict discipline, challenges, and survival. Jonathan found himself trying to piece together these fragments, but every time he thought he understood, she would shift the conversation to something entirely different, leaving him both intrigued and slightly unsettled. One evening, while Jonathan was reading in his study, Yelena came in carrying a small notebook. She sat quietly across from him, flipping through the pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. "I like to write down observations," she explained softly, as if she were reading his thoughts. Jonathan was curious and a little wary. He had never met anyone so meticulous about documenting life. Her gaze occasionally met his, and he felt an unspoken challenge in the way she watched him read. He wondered if she was recording him too. Despite these peculiarities, Jonathan enjoyed their growing connection. He found himself sharing more than he had intended, revealing childhood memories, regrets, and small daily frustrations. Yelena listened attentively, offering advice or insights that were often surprisingly perceptive. Yet there was an edge to her understanding, a sharpness that suggested she had faced circumstances far harsher than he could imagine. Jonathan admired her resilience, but also felt the growing weight of the unknown. He was living with someone who had secrets, and some of those secrets were beginning to surface in small, unsettling ways. One weekend, Jonathan decided to take her on a short drive to explore the nearby countryside. He wanted to see her smile in a setting other than their house, to witness her reactions to the world beyond walls and routines. As they drove, Yelena's eyes scanned the landscape with keen interest. She pointed out small details, the shape of trees, the rhythm of birds in flight, patterns in the fields, things that Jonathan would have overlooked entirely. It struck him how different her perspective was, how attentive and alert she remained even in the calm of nature. That night, back at home, Jonathan noticed something new. Yelena had placed small objects in unusual places, a vase slightly off-center, a folded napkin in a corner he had never used, a chair angled differently than usual. When he asked about it, she smiled faintly. "Just making things feel right," she said. But Jonathan felt a twinge of unease. He couldn't explain why these minor adjustments unsettled him. They were harmless, yet they hinted at a precision, a control that he had not encountered before. The following days brought subtle tests of trust. Yelena would suggest small tasks, rearranging a bookshelf, preparing a meal in a particular way, or helping her with certain household chores, always in a gentle, almost playful tone. Jonathan complied without question at first, enjoying the closeness, the sense of being needed. But gradually he realized that these tasks carried an element of observation, a quiet scrutiny of how he reacted, how he performed, and how he obeyed or questioned. It was as though she were teaching him about her world while simultaneously revealing hers. Jonathan began to notice her habits in more personal ways. She would sometimes watch him quietly while he worked in the garden or prepared dinner, her expression calm but attentive. Occasionally, she would make remarks that were playful on the surface, but carried an undertone of expectation. "You always do things carefully," she said one day, "but sometimes it's fun to try them differently." He laughed, unsure what she meant, but he felt the subtle shift in their dynamic. She was no longer just a guest in his home. She was shaping how he thought, how he moved, and even how he felt. It was during one quiet evening that Jonathan first sensed the depth of her influence. They had been discussing minor household matters when Yelena leaned forward slightly and whispered something in a way that made him pause. Her words were simple, almost casual, but the tone carried weight. Jonathan felt a mixture of surprise and curiosity, a recognition that she had a side of herself he had not yet seen. She smiled, then continued talking about mundane things as if nothing had happened, leaving him with a flutter of anticipation and confusion. Jonathan tried to rationalize these feelings. He reminded himself that she had lived a very different life, that her experiences had shaped her into someone precise, observant, and capable of subtle control. He admired her strength and adaptability, but could not shake the sense that there was more lurking beneath the surface. It was a thrilling kind of unease, one that made every interaction unpredictable yet fascinating. He found himself looking forward to discovering more, even as he worried about what he might uncover. As the days passed, their bond deepened in unexpected ways. Yelena was patient, thoughtful, and attentive, yet her mysterious side kept Jonathan constantly alert. He noticed how she would sometimes change the subject abruptly, how she seemed to know when he was hesitant, and how her calm demeanor could shift subtly depending on the conversation. He realized that living with her was not like living with anyone he had known before. It was a blend of companionship, intrigue, and quiet challenge. Jonathan began to reflect on his own life more honestly than he had in years. Yelena's presence forced him to examine his habits, his assumptions, and his expectations. He questioned whether his longing for companionship had blinded him to the realities of who she was and who he was becoming alongside her. Each day brought new discoveries, small but meaningful, about Yelena and himself. He realized that this was not a predictable path, but one filled with learning, adaptation, and the possibility of something deeper than he had imagined. By the end of the second week, Jonathan had become acutely aware of the unique balance in their relationship. There was warmth, laughter, and genuine connection, but also an underlying tension, a sense of unpredictability that kept him alert. Yelena's past, hinted at in small stories and gestures, was slowly revealing itself, shaping the way he interacted with her and the house they shared. He felt both challenged and alive in a way he hadn't felt for years. The excitement of the unknown mingled with the comfort of shared routines, creating a dynamic that was fascinating and sometimes unsettling. Jonathan knew that the weeks ahead would reveal even more about Yelena, her habits, her thoughts, her past, and that he would need to navigate this new reality with patience and understanding. He felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension, realizing that life with Yelena was not going to be ordinary. It would be full of surprises, small shocks, and quiet revelations, each shaping the rhythm of their days and the depth of their bond. He was ready to face it, knowing that the journey they were beginning was as much about discovering her as it was about rediscovering himself. Jonathan had grown used to the rhythms of living with Yelena. Each day brought small discoveries, little surprises that kept him alert but also intrigued. He had started to understand her habits, her attentiveness, and her quiet ways of observing. Yet he could never predict her completely. She was like a puzzle, each piece carefully hidden until the right moment. It was one ordinary evening that the unexpected happened. Jonathan had been sorting some old documents in the study when Yelena entered quietly, carrying a small, folded piece of paper. She placed it on the desk without a word and sat down across from him. Jonathan glanced at the paper, curious. It was a note, neatly written in her precise handwriting. He picked it up and read the words aloud to himself. "No one's watching, now do it." His heart skipped a beat. The words themselves were simple, almost casual, but the tone behind them made him pause. Jonathan looked at Yelena, but she was calm, composed, smiling faintly as if nothing were unusual. Her eyes, however, held a spark that made him uneasy yet strangely curious. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "It's just a test," she said softly, "to see how you respond when you trust someone completely." Jonathan swallowed hard. He had expected small surprises or unusual habits, but this was different. It wasn't a game in the ordinary sense, it carried weight. There was something in her calm demeanor, her precise instructions, that hinted at a deeper part of her life, one he had not yet seen. He realized that Yelena had layers, experiences, and confidence shaped by events far beyond his imagination. He hesitated, unsure of what exactly she wanted. Her words were gentle but commanding, a combination that made it difficult to ignore. Jonathan had always been cautious, careful not to act impulsively. Yet in that moment he felt a strange pull, a mixture of trust and anticipation. He realized that this was more than a small household routine or playful suggestion. It was a window into the true Yelena, the side she had carefully concealed during their first weeks together. Yelena watched him with quiet patience, noticing the subtle tension in his shoulders, the quick glance to the door as if to check whether anyone might be listening. Her expression was calm, almost teacher-like, yet there was a faint thrill in her eyes. Jonathan could feel the weight of her presence, the quiet expectation that he would act, that he would step into the unknown and trust her completely. He took a deep breath and tried to focus. He wanted to understand her, to connect with the real Yelena, but he also felt nervous. This wasn't a situation he had ever encountered before, and the uncertainty made his chest tighten. He looked at her again, searching for a clue, a sign, anything that could help him decide. But she remained composed, her calmness contrasting with the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. Finally, Jonathan decided to act cautiously. He picked up the paper and read it again, aloud this time, letting each word sink in. "No one's watching, now do it." He felt a rush of adrenaline. There was something about following her instructions, even without knowing the full purpose, that felt daring. It was as if he had stepped out of the quiet, predictable life he had built for himself and entered a space where the rules were hers, yet inviting him to participate. Yelena smiled faintly, encouraging but not pressing. "It's okay," she whispered. "Just trust me." Her voice was soft, yet it carried authority. Jonathan realized that trust was at the heart of this moment, not blind trust, but trust built on months of letters, conversations, and shared experiences. He felt a strange bond strengthen between them, one that went beyond companionship and routine. As he followed her instructions, a wave of understanding began to settle over him. The words on the paper were not merely a command. They were a test of connection, a demonstration of her confidence in him. Jonathan realized that Yelena had grown up in a life that demanded careful observation, trust, and adaptability. She had faced situations that required precision and calm under pressure, and now she was sharing a fragment of that world with him. The moment was brief, yet it left a lasting impact. Jonathan felt exhilarated and bewildered at the same time. He had glimpsed a side of Yelena that he could not have imagined from letters or smiles. It was a side shaped by her past, by experiences that demanded strength, courage, and subtle control. And yet there was no danger here, no malice, only the quiet intensity of someone confident in herself and her understanding of others. After the moment passed, they both sat quietly. Jonathan could feel his heart still racing, and he realized how much he had underestimated her. Yelena, on the other hand, seemed content, satisfied with the interaction, as if she had given him a small but important lesson. The balance of their relationship had shifted slightly. There was a new understanding between them, a recognition that she was not simply the gentle companion he had imagined, but a woman with depth, experience, and a mind of her own. That night, Jonathan lay awake thinking about the events of the evening. He recalled her calm confidence, the subtle spark in her eyes, and the quiet authority behind her words. He realized that the life he had imagined with her, simple mornings, peaceful evenings, predictable routines, was only part of the story. There was a complexity to Yelena that made her fascinating, challenging, and deeply engaging. Over the following days, Jonathan noticed a subtle change in their interactions. Yelena was more open, yet her mysterious aura remained. She shared small stories from her past, anecdotes about childhood discipline, responsibility, and survival in challenging circumstances. Jonathan listened intently, realizing that her experiences had shaped her into someone both resilient and insightful. Her calm demeanor, meticulous habits, and quiet authority were products of her life, not quirks or games. Jonathan also began to see the influence she had on him. He found himself more attentive to details, more cautious yet confident in small decisions, and more aware of the way he interacted with the world. Yelena's presence was teaching him subtle lessons about trust, observation, and patience. He realized that living with her was not just companionship. It was an ongoing process of learning, understanding, and growing together. One afternoon, Jonathan attempted to recreate a small ritual he had established before her arrival, organizing his desk and files in a precise order. Yelena observed quietly from across the room, then suggested small improvements. Her suggestions were minor, but the precision and care behind them amazed him. He noticed how she could transform ordinary tasks into exercises in attention and mindfulness. Jonathan smiled, realizing that her influence extended into every corner of his life, shaping not just his routines but his thoughts and awareness. Yet, even with these new insights, Jonathan could feel the tension building subtly. He sensed that there were parts of Yelena he had not yet encountered, that her past held experiences and stories she had chosen to reveal only gradually. The whisper of the note, the calm authority in her voice, and the precise way she moved through the house were constant reminders that she was not an ordinary companion. He felt both excitement and apprehension, a thrilling combination that made every interaction captivating. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Yelena paused and looked at Jonathan carefully. "Sometimes," she said softly, "you have to do things you don't fully understand to see who you really are." Jonathan paused, knife in hand, trying to absorb her words. There was wisdom there, wrapped in mystery, and he realized that she was guiding him gently toward understanding not just her world, but his own capabilities, courage, and trust. The days that followed continued in a similar rhythm: shared meals, quiet conversations, small tests of trust, and subtle lessons in observation. Jonathan could feel their bond deepening, shaped by these small but significant experiences. Yelena's presence was transforming the house, his routines, and his perception of life. Each day brought new surprises, new insights, and new questions about her past, her personality, and the life that had shaped her so completely. Jonathan understood, slowly but surely, that the woman he had invited into his life was far more than he had imagined. She was intelligent, observant, and confident, yet she also carried stories of resilience and adaptability that made her fascinating and sometimes unpredictable. The whispered note, the quiet challenges, and the careful observations were all part of her way of revealing herself, a methodical unveiling of depth, trust, and connection. By the end of the week, Jonathan could feel a shift in himself. He was more alert, more thoughtful, and more aware of the subtleties in their interactions. Yelena's presence had become a mirror, reflecting both her experiences and his own capacity for trust, patience, and understanding. He knew that the journey they had begun was far from ordinary, and that the weeks ahead would reveal more of her complexity, more of the lessons she carried from her past, and more opportunities for him to grow alongside her. Jonathan finally realized that the turning point in their relationship had arrived. The whispered note was not just an isolated incident, but a symbol of a deeper connection, one that combined curiosity, trust, and the subtle thrill of discovering someone truly unique. He understood that life with Yelena would never be ordinary, but he was ready for the challenge, ready to embrace the mysteries, and eager to see what new revelations awaited. Jonathan awoke that morning with a strange mix of anticipation and unease. The events of the previous week had settled into his mind like a quiet storm, leaving him alert but unable to fully relax. Yelena had a way of blending into the background of daily life, yet somehow she always managed to influence the air around him. Every glance, every word, every movement seemed to carry purpose. It was as though living with her required constant awareness, and he found himself both fascinated and nervous about what each day might reveal. That day began like any other. Jonathan went about his morning routine, preparing breakfast and tidying the kitchen, while Yelena quietly moved around him, assisting with small tasks or offering suggestions with gentle authority. Her calmness was reassuring, but beneath it lay a subtle intensity he could feel without fully understanding. There was an energy in her presence, one that hinted at her past experiences, a life shaped by survival, discipline, and quiet control. Jonathan sometimes wondered how someone could remain so composed after facing such unknown challenges, yet there she was, embodying it effortlessly. After breakfast, Jonathan decided to tackle some paperwork he had been postponing for weeks. Yelena followed him into the study, carrying her small notebook as usual. She sat across from him, flipping through pages while occasionally glancing up to watch him work. Her eyes were calm, yet Jonathan could feel the unspoken question: was he performing as she expected? He had grown accustomed to her quiet assessments, but today it felt sharper, more deliberate, almost like a test he had yet to understand. It wasn't long before the first ripple of tension appeared. Jonathan had arranged the documents in what he thought was the proper order, only to notice Yelena gently moving a folder, adjusting the alignment of papers on the desk. "Careful with the details," she said softly, her voice calm but authoritative. "Even small mistakes can make a difference." Jonathan nodded, realizing that she was not criticizing him in the usual way. This was a subtle lesson about precision, observation, and patience. He felt a mix of pride and unease, impressed by her insight but aware that living with her required constant mindfulness. Later in the morning, Yelena suggested they go through some household repairs together. Jonathan welcomed the distraction, hoping it would ease the lingering tension in the house. As they worked side by side, tightening screws, fixing leaky faucets, and rearranging furniture, Jonathan began to notice more patterns in her behavior. She was meticulous in every action, precise and deliberate, never hurried, yet always in control. He realized that these habits were not quirks. They were skills honed from years of careful living, a life shaped by circumstance and necessity. By mid-afternoon, Jonathan felt exhausted, not from physical work but from the constant mental awareness Yelena demanded. He paused to take a sip of water and noticed her watching him. She smiled faintly, a smile that was gentle yet knowing, as if she could read his thoughts. Jonathan felt a rush of both admiration and apprehension. He understood that her presence was a constant challenge, not in a hostile way, but in a manner that encouraged growth, awareness, and adaptability. Living with her was no longer just companionship. It was an ongoing exercise in mindfulness, observation, and trust. As the evening approached, Yelena suggested a quiet walk in the garden. Jonathan followed, curious to see how she would guide him through something as simple as tending to plants. She moved gracefully among the flowers, showing him where to prune, how to water, and how to arrange the pots for maximum sunlight. Jonathan noticed the care she took with every movement, the precision with which she explained her choices. He realized that this was another lesson, subtly demonstrating patience, attentiveness, and the value of careful observation in everyday life. During the walk, Jonathan's mind wandered to the whispered note from the previous week. The memory of her words, "No one's watching, now do it," lingered, mixing with the calm authority she exhibited now. He felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. That single moment had shifted the dynamic between them, opening a door to a side of Yelena he had not fully understood. And now, with each passing day, the consequences of that moment were becoming clearer. Living with her required not only trust but a willingness to engage with a life full of surprises, subtle challenges, and hidden depths. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner together, Jonathan noticed a new tension emerging. Yelena asked him to follow her instructions for a recipe, step by step. At first, the task seemed simple, but she had a precise method in mind. Jonathan found himself second-guessing his choices, adjusting ingredients and steps based on her guidance. He realized that even mundane tasks carried lessons, subtle tests of observation, patience, and trust. Each instruction revealed a new layer of her character, a glimpse into the discipline and careful control that had shaped her life. The tension grew when Yelena suggested a small challenge, organizing the pantry in a specific order she had devised. Jonathan complied, but he struggled to remember every detail. She observed quietly, occasionally offering gentle corrections. He noticed how precise her instructions were and how attentive she was to every action he took. The exercise, simple as it seemed, left Jonathan mentally drained but also more aware. He understood that living with Yelena was not about domination or control in a negative sense. It was about guiding, teaching, and shaping trust through careful observation. After dinner, Jonathan retreated to his study, reflecting on the day. He realized that Yelena's past, hinted at through her words and actions, was now fully influencing their daily life. Her experiences had given her a confidence and insight that left a subtle mark on him, guiding him toward self-awareness and attentiveness. He thought about how far they had come, from simple companionship to a relationship where every action, glance, and word carried meaning. It was exhausting at times, yet exhilarating. He had never felt so alert, so engaged, or so aware of another person's influence. That night, as Jonathan prepared for bed, Yelena approached him with her notebook. She opened it to a page filled with observations and small notes. "I've noticed how you handle challenges," she said softly, her tone calm yet deliberate. "It tells me a lot about who you are." Jonathan felt a shiver run through him. It was not criticism, but recognition. She was not only observing him, but teaching him, revealing the subtle ways he could grow, improve, and adapt. He realized that the consequences of her presence were now undeniable. He was changing, becoming more mindful, more aware, and more attuned to the world around him. Over the next few days, Jonathan continued to feel the weight of these consequences. Each interaction with Yelena carried subtle lessons and quiet challenges. Sometimes it was as simple as arranging books in a certain order, following her instructions for cooking, or completing tasks she suggested in her precise manner. Other times it was more abstract, reading her expressions, anticipating her needs, understanding the nuances in her words. He realized that living with Yelena was not passive. It required full engagement, awareness, and trust. Jonathan began to reflect deeply on the nature of their relationship. He understood that Yelena's secret, the calm authority, the precise observations, and the subtle challenges, was not meant to manipulate, but to reveal truths about both of them. Her past had shaped her into someone extraordinarily perceptive and resilient. By living with her, he was being drawn into that world, learning lessons about trust, attentiveness, and patience. The consequences of her secret were not negative, they were transformative, reshaping his understanding of companionship, respect, and connection. By the end of the week, Jonathan felt a profound shift. He was more aware of his surroundings, more attentive to details, and more conscious of his own reactions. Yelena's influence was no longer subtle. It had become a defining element of his daily life. He understood that the woman he had invited into his home was extraordinary, not only in her grace and intelligence, but in the quiet power she wielded through observation, patience, and trust. The consequences of her secret had reshaped the rhythm of their lives, leaving him both challenged and exhilarated. Jonathan realized that living with Yelena was a journey, one that required courage, mindfulness, and openness to change. Her presence demanded engagement, reflection, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected. The whispered note from weeks ago, once a small mystery, now seemed like the beginning of a larger lesson, one that continued to unfold with every shared meal, quiet conversation, and subtle interaction. The consequences of her secret were no longer hidden. They were an integral part of the life they were building together. As the night settled over the house, Jonathan looked at Yelena sitting calmly by the window, her notebook in hand, a faint smile on her face. He felt a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and quiet excitement. He understood that their journey was only beginning, and that the lessons she brought into his life would continue to shape him in ways he could not yet predict. The weight of her secret was no longer a burden, but a guiding force, leading him toward understanding, growth, and a deeper connection than he had ever imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Jonathan could feel the subtle changes in himself becoming more permanent. Yelena's presence in the house was no longer a curious novelty or an occasional challenge. It had become the rhythm of his life. Every movement, every glance, and every word between them carried meaning. He had learned to anticipate her habits, to read the small signals in her expressions, and to respect the quiet authority she carried. Living with her had become a lesson in mindfulness, patience, and trust, and Jonathan realized he had grown in ways he had never imagined. Yelena, too, had begun to open up more. She shared more stories of her past, not all at once, but in gentle pieces, revealing the experiences that had shaped her. She spoke of a childhood where she had to be careful, where every action had consequences, and where observation was a survival skill. Jonathan listened intently, fascinated by the strength and resilience that had formed her into the woman she was today. He understood that her mysterious side, the quiet tests, the careful observation, and the whispered notes, was not meant to control him, but to teach him, guide him, and draw him closer into understanding her world. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the living room windows, Jonathan watched Yelena arranging flowers in a vase. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, and calm. He realized how much he had come to admire these small moments, the way she approached life with precision, the care she took in even the simplest tasks, and the gentle strength she carried without effort. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for her companionship, but for the lessons she had taught him through her quiet influence. Over breakfast, Jonathan reflected on how far they had come. He remembered the day she first arrived, the nervous anticipation he had felt, and the gentle uncertainty that had accompanied every early interaction. Now, he saw that those first days had been the beginning of a transformation for both of them. Yelena had helped him rediscover qualities within himself that had lain dormant: patience, attentiveness, and the courage to trust someone fully. He realized that their connection was not about perfection or idealized companionship, but about growth, understanding, and the shared journey of life. As the days passed, the balance in their relationship became more apparent. Jonathan had learned to embrace Yelena's guidance, the subtle tests, and the quiet lessons embedded in daily routines. Yelena, in turn, had learned to trust him more openly, to share her thoughts and stories without fear of judgment. They began to communicate with a depth that went beyond words, a mutual understanding built on months of shared experiences, careful observation, and growing trust. The house that had once felt quiet and empty now hummed with life, attention, and connection. One afternoon, Jonathan decided to take Yelena for a short drive to the countryside, similar to the first excursion they had taken together. This time, the experience was different. He observed her noticing the smallest details, pointing out patterns in nature, commenting on the rhythm of the birds and the shapes of the clouds. He smiled, realizing how much he had learned from her and how much his perspective had shifted. Where once he might have overlooked these details, now he felt attuned to the world around him, appreciating nuances he had never noticed before. During the drive, Yelena spoke softly about her hopes for the future. She shared her dreams of building a life together filled with learning, understanding, and shared experiences. Jonathan listened, feeling a profound sense of connection. He realized that the life he had once imagined, quiet, simple, and predictable, was now richer and deeper than he had ever anticipated. The lessons Yelena had taught him were not just about trust or observation, but about appreciating life itself in all its subtleties, complexities, and small wonders. Back at home, their evenings took on a calm rhythm. They shared meals, tended to the garden, and worked on household tasks together. Each activity became an opportunity to connect, to observe, and to learn from one another. Jonathan found himself more patient, more attentive, and more aware of the subtleties in their interactions. Yelena's influence had become a guiding force in his life, shaping his habits, his thoughts, and his approach to challenges. Yet there was no tension, no pressure, only a sense of harmony built on trust, respect, and mutual growth. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Jonathan looked across the table at Yelena and noticed the gentle strength in her expression. He realized that their journey had taught him far more than he had ever expected. He had learned to trust fully, to embrace uncertainty, and to grow alongside someone extraordinary. Yelena had revealed herself gradually, not through grand gestures, but through small moments, subtle guidance, and quiet tests. Jonathan understood that this was the essence of their relationship, not a story of control or dominance, but of shared growth and understanding. As the weeks turned into months, Jonathan reflected on the changes in his life. He no longer felt the loneliness that had once weighed heavily on him. The quiet house, once filled with echoes of absence, now resonated with life, attention, and connection. Yelena had become not only a companion but a teacher, guiding him gently toward greater awareness, patience, and trust. He understood that the lessons she had brought into his life were lifelong gifts, shaping him in ways he could never have imagined. Jonathan also began to see the depth of Yelena's transformation. She had arrived in his home carrying the weight of her past experiences, but she had chosen to trust him, to reveal herself gradually, and to build a life together founded on understanding, patience, and mutual respect. He admired her resilience, her insight, and her ability to influence without demanding, to guide without imposing. Yelena's presence had not only changed him, but it had also strengthened her own sense of trust, connection, and belonging. One quiet morning, as they sat together in the living room with tea in hand, Jonathan realized how fully their lives had intertwined. The subtle tests, the whispered notes, the careful observations, all had led to a deeper bond than either of them had anticipated. They had discovered a relationship built not on fantasy, but on reality, trust, respect, understanding, and the willingness to grow together. Jonathan smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace and gratitude. He had not only found companionship but a life enriched by the presence of someone extraordinary. That evening, Jonathan and Yelena took a walk in the garden, observing the flowers, pruning carefully, and sharing quiet conversation. Jonathan noticed the care in Yelena's movements, the thoughtfulness in her words, and the gentle strength in her gaze. He realized that life with her was a continuous journey of learning and growth. Every day brought new insights, subtle lessons, and opportunities to deepen their connection. He felt fortunate to share this journey with someone so perceptive, strong, and kind. As the night fell, Jonathan reflected on the path they had traveled together. He thought of the day Yelena had arrived, the nervous anticipation, and the quiet unease he had felt in the early days. He remembered the whispered note, the subtle challenges, and the careful observations that had at first unsettled him. Now he saw that every moment had been a step toward understanding, trust, and connection. The journey had not been simple, but it had been profoundly rewarding. Jonathan understood that love and companionship were not about perfection or idealized fantasies. They were about growth, mutual respect, and shared discovery. Yelena had taught him to see the world differently, to notice details, to appreciate subtlety, and to trust in both himself and the bond they shared. He realized that the most meaningful relationships were built not on convenience, but on patience, understanding, and the willingness to embrace both the challenges and the joys of life together. By the end of the year, their home had transformed from a quiet, lonely space into a place of warmth, attentiveness, and shared life. Jonathan felt stronger, more aware, and more alive than he had in years. Yelena had become not only his companion but his partner in every sense, someone whose presence challenged him, taught him, and enriched his life in ways he had never imagined. The whispered words from the past, once mysterious and unsettling, had grown into symbols of trust, connection, and growth. As Jonathan lay in bed that night, he thought about the future. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges and surprises, but he also knew that together, he and Yelena could face anything. Their bond was built on trust, respect, and the shared journey of learning and understanding. He felt a quiet joy, knowing that he had found not only a companion but a partner who would walk with him through life, sharing every lesson, every discovery, and every moment of growth. Jonathan turned toward Yelena, who was already asleep beside him, and smiled. He realized that their story was not about sudden revelations or dramatic events, but about the quiet, transformative power of trust, patience, and shared experience. The life they had built together was richer, deeper, and more meaningful than he could have imagined. And in that moment, Jonathan knew that he had found something rare and extraordinary, a love and companionship built not on fantasy, but on understanding, respect, and the courage to grow together.